The auction yard smelled of sweat, whiskey, and fear. Dust hung thick in the air as men in tattered hats crowded around the platform, some laughing, others bartering over human misery as if it were cattle. It was a warm afternoon in 1873, in the lawless frontier town of Claridge, a place where justice was as scarce as rain. On that splintered wooden platform stood a young woman, wrists bound, hair matted with dirt and blood. Her name, though few cared to know it, was Eliza Mae Carter. The trader beside her was a heavy-set man with a gut like a barrel and a scar that cut through his left cheek. He grinned as he turned to the crowd. $2, he bellowed. That's all I'm askin'. $2 and she's yours, cook, clean, whatever you please. The crowd roared with crude laughter. To them, she wasn't a person. Just another burden for the block. Eliza didn't look at them. Her chin lifted stubbornly, though her body trembled with exhaustion. There was a defiance in her eyes, the kind that only those who've lost everything can hold. The sun beat down, baking the dirt beneath her bare feet, yet she stood tall, silent. From the edge of the crowd, a man stepped forward. He wasn't like the others. His hat was worn, his boots dusty, his eyes calm and unreadable. His name was Silas Grant, a former Union soldier turned rancher. He was known in Claridge for keeping to himself, never gambling, never drinking. Just working his land and minding his business. But that afternoon, something in him shifted. Maybe it was the way Eliza refused to break under the jeers. Maybe it was the faint tremor in her hands, the quiet plea that wasn't spoken but somehow heard. He walked through the crowd until he stood before the platform. $2, he said evenly. The trader smirked, spitting a wad of tobacco near Silas's boot. That's right, ain't worth a dime more. You want her, cowboy. Without another word, Silas reached into his coat and pulled out $2 silver. The coins gleamed in the sun as they hit the crate with a sharp clink. The trader's grin faltered for a moment, unsure if this was mockery or madness. She's free now, Silas said simply. The laughter stopped. A few men muttered under their breath. Others stared, trying to make sense of what they'd just seen. You didn't buy a slave to set her free, not in Claridge. The trader gave a low chuckle, shaking his head. You buy her, she's yours. Don't say I didn't warn ya. That one's cursed. Everyone who's owned her says the same. Silas didn't answer. He stepped forward, pulled a knife from his belt, and cut the ropes around Eliza's wrists. She flinched as the cords fell away, her skin raw and red beneath them. He held out his hand, but she didn't take it. She just stared at him, confusion, suspicion, and disbelief warring in her eyes. Come on, he said quietly. You're free to go. She hesitated, then stepped down from the platform. The crowd parted, murmuring. Some spat on the ground as she passed. Others made the sign of the cross, as though she carried some kind of curse. Silas ignored them all. Together, they walked out of the yard, her bare feet leaving faint prints in the dust. By the time they reached the edge of town, the sun was setting, a molten red sinking behind the hills. Silas stopped beside his wagon and untied a canteen, handing it to her. She drank greedily, water spilling down her chin. When she finished, he handed her a blanket. You can rest here for the night, he said, lighting a small fire. No one'll bother you. She sat opposite him, the firelight flickering over her tired face. After a long silence, she spoke for the first time, her voice hoarse and brittle. You shouldn't have done that. Silas looked up. Done what? Bought me, she said. You don't know what I did to end up there. He studied her for a moment, then shrugged. Don't matter. You're free now. The days that followed were wrapped in silence. The wagon creaked along the dirt road as the prairie stretched endlessly in every direction, a sea of gold beneath the pale blue sky. Eliza sat in the back, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes never meeting Silas's. The bruises on her wrists had begun to fade, but the haunted look in her eyes did not. She rarely spoke, except to ask for water. Silas didn't press her. He'd learned long ago that some wounds needed quiet, not questions. He just guided the horses, watching the horizon as if the road ahead could explain what fate had just placed beside him. On the third evening, they stopped by a creek. The setting sun painted the sky in fire and blood, its reflection rippling across the water. Silas unhitched the horses and went about making camp while Eliza knelt by the stream, scrubbing her hands raw. He noticed her fingers trembling as she rubbed harder and harder until the skin turned red. You'll hurt yourself, he said quietly. Her head jerked up, startled. They won't come off, she whispered. No matter how much I wash. He frowned. What won't? She turned her palms toward him. They were clean, but she stared at them like they were drenched in something only she could see. Blood, she said. It never really goes away. Silas didn't know what to say. He just nodded slowly and went back to the fire. That night, she didn't eat much. When she finally lay down, her sleep came in fits, shivering, muttering, eyes darting beneath closed lids. Twice he heard her cry out. Once, he almost reached over to wake her, but stopped. Whatever hunted her in her dreams was not something he could chase away. By the fourth morning, they reached his ranch, a lonely stretch of land nestled between rolling hills, the kind of place forgotten by time. The wooden fence creaked in the wind, the grass swaying like it was breathing. Silas dismounted and opened the gate. You can stay here a while, he said, till you figure out where you're headed. Eliza didn't move. Her gaze lingered on the farmhouse, plain, sturdy, but strangely peaceful. You live out here alone? She asked softly. He nodded. Just me and the land. Why? She asked, almost like she couldn't understand choosing solitude. Silas shrugged. Some people find peace in silence. Others run from it. Something flickered in her eyes, a recognition, perhaps. She finally stepped forward, crossing the gate like someone entering sacred ground. The ranch dog, an old hound named Boone, trotted up and sniffed at her skirt before settling back down. She froze, then slowly reached out a trembling hand to pet his head. Boone wagged his tail once, then lay still. For a moment, her expression softened. Later, while Silas fixed the roof and fetched water, Eliza wandered the fields. She seemed restless, pacing, touching the bark of trees, staring off at the hills like she was expecting something to appear. When Silas brought her a loaf of bread, she looked at him sharply. You shouldn't keep me here, she said. If they find out I'm alive. Who? She hesitated, glancing away. The people from Claridge, the ones who sold me. He leaned against the fence post. You said you weren't supposed to be free. Why? She turned toward him then, eyes glassy, voice trembling. Because freedom was never part of the deal. Before he could ask what she meant, thunder rumbled in the distance. Dark clouds rolled over the horizon, the kind that carried both rain and danger. By nightfall, the storm hit. Wind slammed against the windows, rain pounding the roof like gunfire. Silas lay in bed, unable to sleep. Something about her words gnawed at him. Then, through the roar of the storm, he heard it, the barn door creaking open. He grabbed his lantern, pulled on his coat, and stepped into the rain. The wind tore at his hat as he crossed the yard, boots sinking into the mud. Lightning flashed, illuminating the barn in white fire. Inside, Eliza was on her knees, praying before something wrapped in a blood-stained cloth. Her lips moved in frantic whispers, tears streaking her face. Eliza, he called out. She froze. Slowly, she turned, her face pale and wild-eyed. You weren't supposed to see this, she whispered, clutching the bundle close to her chest. He lifted the lantern, its light catching the corner of the cloth. Dark stains, old and rusted, spread across it. What is that? Eliza's voice broke. It's all that's left. Eliza sank to the barn floor, knees pressed to her chest, clutching the charred cross as if it were the last tether to her life. Her body shook uncontrollably, racked with sobs that seemed too deep for such a young frame. Silas stood in the doorway, lantern in hand, shadows stretching across the barn like fingers of the past reaching out. He did not speak. Words would not suffice. All he could do was watch the storm outside mirror the storm inside her. Finally, she lifted her tear-streaked face. It was me, she confessed, her voice barely a whisper above the pounding rain. I didn't mean to kill them. The church, they locked me in. They said I was a witch. A healer. I used herbs to help a child, and they said I had cursed the town. They wanted me cleansed, burned. Her words trembled with terror and guilt, but the worst was yet unsaid. I tried to escape, but the flames, they spread too fast. I couldn't save them. I swear I didn't mean to. I only wanted to live. Silas lowered the lantern, letting the dim glow fall across her haggard face. The wind howled, rattling the wooden beams above, as though the universe itself was listening. He could turn her in. There would be a reward, perhaps a medal, perhaps a reputation as the man who delivered justice. But he saw her, the hollowed eyes, the trembling hands, the raw humanity of someone condemned before the world even understood her story. You earned your freedom with pain, he said quietly, his voice steady despite the storm. Those $2, they just paid the balance. Eliza's eyes widened, disbelief mingling with grief. You don't understand, you don't know what it's like to live with death in your hands. She shook her head violently. Every night I see their faces. Every night I hear the flames, the screams, her sobs tore through the barn like the wind outside. I'm a killer. That's all I'll ever be. Silas knelt before her, placing the lantern on the floor. His gaze did not waver. You were a prisoner of their fear, not a murderer of intent, he said. You survived because they wanted to punish you, not because you chose evil. For a long moment, the only sound was the rain in her quiet, uneven breaths. Then, as if the storm outside had finally convinced her it was safe to hope, she whispered, What now? The law will come, Silas said, his eyes darkening. They'll want answers, someone to blame. If you stay, they'll hang you. If you leave, he paused, searching for words that could carry both truth and mercy. Maybe you'll find a place where the past doesn't define you. Eliza looked at him like she was seeing the world for the first time, or perhaps like she was seeing someone choose her life over his own comfort. He stood and extended a hand, not to pull her up, but to offer guidance. I'll give you supplies, food, a horse if you need it. $2 silver, the same ones I paid for your freedom. Consider them a start, not an end. She hesitated, then took the pouch, clutching it to her chest. Why help me? She asked, voice shaking. Silas looked out toward the hills, past the barn, past the trees swaying violently in the storm. Because I know what it's like to burn for something you didn't do, he said. Because sometimes, the world makes monsters of those who only wanted to survive. Morning came slowly, the storm retreating like a wounded beast. Gray clouds lingered, dripping rain into puddles that reflected the rising sun. Silas saddled his horse and led it to her, standing silently as she weighed her options. The wind carried the smell of wet earth and pine, a promise of the unknown waiting just beyond the hills. Finally, she mounted the horse. Boone, the old hound, trotted alongside her, sniffing the mud as if offering a silent blessing. She looked down at Silas, eyes still filled with tears but now glimmering with a fragile determination. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely carrying over the gentle breeze. Silas nodded, tipping his hat. Find your peace, Eliza Mae. The past doesn't get to dictate the rest of your life unless you let it. With that, she rode away, her figure swallowed by the hills, the horizon blending into gold and gray. Silas watched until she disappeared entirely, leaving nothing behind but the soft rustling of grass and the distant echo of a horse's hooves fading into the wilderness. He returned to the barn, picked up the charred cross, and set it aside on a shelf. Then he turned to the fire, now nothing more than embers, and laid the $2 silver on the mantel. They gleamed in the early morning sun, untouched and heavy with the weight of a story neither coin nor man could ever fully repay. Silas knew the world outside would judge her, punish her, perhaps even forget her. But he also knew something more enduring had been bought in those moments, not just freedom, but the chance to survive, to carry hope beyond the flames. And in that quiet truth, he found a measure of peace he had long thought impossible in Claridge.